So, 6 years in Bank of America. How you ended up in National Bank of Fujairah in Dubai.
And I just had this kind of blown away moment when I'm like, I'm not going to get the opportunity in corporate UK or corporate America to work pretty much directly this closely with billionaires who have helped build countries.
Have you managed to implement something from your childhood to your relations with kids?
I tried to make things as tough and as challenging for them as possible. And for me, learning the value of money, it is so important. Please find ways in the holidays to let your kids take risks.
3 things you would advise to the people who are there how to get successful.
You have to build a network. Number 2, balance. The third thing that I think is most important, the one thing that sets me apart from some other CEOs, is
Chris, hi.
Yes. Hey, how are you?
I'm good and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Chris, let me do a quick introduction of what I know so far about you, and hopefully that I'll know much more in the end of our conversation. You started in your professional career in 1995 with the audit.
Yep.
You've been with Deloitte for 5 years,
Yep.
and then you moved to finance, to banks, and it was Bank of America, National Bank of Fujairah, Abu Dhabi Finance. Then a little bit of a twist to real estate, and then back to finance. In the middle of all these things, you managed to get an IDP from INSEAD. When was that?
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
And you're a father of 3, and we are here in Dubai. So let me ask you my first question. What should I know about your first 20 years of life? Where were you born? How this early experience of life shaped you and maybe shaped your career afterwards?
Okay. We're traveling back in time. It's quite a long time ago now. So look, I was born in a city called Portsmouth, which is south of the UK. But I was really only there for 2 or 3 years. We moved around quite a lot following my father's work. Both my parents worked in the public sector in the UK, sort of the education and library sector. So a few years in a few different cities, and we ended up in a beautiful part of the UK, a county called Shropshire, very rural area, no big cities, kind of small town. And I went to a very nice school. It was a boys' grammar school. So a boys' grammar school, high academic achievement, high sporting achievement, extremely competitive environment. And so the 3 things that I think formed inside me when I reflect on those 20 years, I'm extremely competitive. And that was partly how my father brought me up. My father was a very competitive athlete. He was one of 3 brothers. They always competed. And I was brought up to compete. I remember playing games with him. And until I could beat him, he did not let me win until I could beat him at whatever it was, right? And I loved it. I mean, I loved it. I thrived on it. A boys' grammar school, also, again, just a highly competitive academic and sporting excellence. We were driven to really compete. That was a very classic English education. So extremely competitive kind of by nature and also by nurture. Moving around the UK a lot, so I never put down incredibly strong roots, which I think has made the move to another country and countries that I've worked in, and we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure, but much, much easier. But third, and the one that I didn't realize until I was much older, growing up, seeing my parents work in the public sector, whilst they loved their jobs, we did not have a lot of money. I mean, we come from a working class but well-educated sort of family background, and money was never a big problem, but it also was not something that we had easily. So I had to work. I mean, I worked, my first job, I think I was 12. Right.
12.
I mean, I started working in the UK, you can do that, working agriculture. It was picking crops during the summers, Once you're old enough, working in restaurants, working in, I worked as a post office boy in the summers. I worked in factories. So very kind of, just driven to be self-reliant, right? There was going to be no handouts. There was no kind of like, we pay for this, we do this, you want it, you basically need to go and earn it, right? That was brilliant for two reasons. Firstly, those are obviously jobs that are, again, straightforward working class jobs, right? So I got to interact with a whole ton of people that as you become more professional, you wouldn't necessarily get to do. And secondly, I learned the value of money. And whilst I'm not a particularly materialistic person, I kind of decided that I was going to go private sector and that I was going to build some wealth for my kind of family going forward, because I didn't really probably like the fact that we didn't have some of the things that I saw around me, right? You don't realize that when you're young. I mean, I was super happy. It was a brilliant upbringing. But as you get older, you're like, no, I want to get into the, I want to get into the private sector and make some money.
Okay. But look, my question is, because I'm a dad myself, and I have all these thoughts about how to make a good kids of my kids, how to nurture them better. But look, we are in a position that our kids have pretty much everything, unlike you had.
Yeah.
So have you managed to implement something from your childhood to your life, to your relations with kids?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think it's one of the things that when you've changed your circumstances quite materially, and also when you've come to a place like Dubai, right? In Dubai, there's a lot of wealth, hard worked for normally. You do worry a little bit that your kids are not going to grow up with the same values and work ethic as you, partly because they can't even work here, right? So your kids can't go and get that job, which for me was a really formative type thing. If I ranked myself on a scale of 1 to 10, and I think my kids would rank me the same, 1 to 10, I tried to make things as tough and as challenging for them as possible.
Okay.
And I see that as a good thing to do. I mean, so pocket money is, you get pocket money if you're doing stuff. You need to do tasks, or you need to have an achievement, and they would definitely be ranked at the low end of the scale of the pocket money. It's just the reality. I mean, I see some of the amounts that some of their friends get, and I'm like, this is just not teaching them anything, right? It's not teaching them the value of money. And for me, learning the value of money, it is so important, because you need drive, right? You need hunger. I mean, you need to want to succeed, and you need to experience that hard work and then being well rewarded for it is really worth something, right? So I worked pretty hard on that. I think probably had a reputation as being a fairly tough parent from that perspective. But I even remember one of the teachers, it was a very good teacher, my eldest daughter, and they wrote this note home one term, and it was like, please find ways in the holidays to let your kids take risks. Because Dubai is a very comfortable environment. You're looked after, protected, and it's fantastic as an adult, and as a parent, it's brilliant.
No doubt.
But what the teachers see is they're like, yeah, but your kids they're a bit soft, right? They're not able to decide where the limit is, because everything's protection around them, right? And if I remember as a child and grew up in a very safe part of the UK in the countryside, I guarantee it, from the age of 12, 13, my parents didn't know where I was at the weekends. We were roaming around, we were doing silly things, right? Getting into trouble, but learning through, a little bit like startups learn through making mistakes, right? As a kid, you've got to learn through making mistakes. And I think when you have more wealth as a family, and you live in a very comfortable environment like Dubai, there is a danger of that. And so I really took that to heart. So I kind of pushed them pretty hard, to be honest with you. They also have to learn to do that for themselves, so kind of, letting them make mistakes, but making them be independent. And I guess I'll find out in a few years' time whether it worked or not. Still TBD.
I'm all in this things, and sorry for getting in this direction, but we were thinking, some kind of like camps, obviously, but there is even special camps to make kids more self-sustainable, I would say, right? The one is called anti-fragility.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. But look, let's get back to you.
Sure.
So, 1995, you're getting to Deloitte. You're spending 5 years there. And it's an interesting experience I want to talk to you about because it's a big four and they are all well-known companies. And usually when you see Deloitte in the CV, usually it means that the person knows how to do at least something, right?
Yeah, it's a good grounding.
Yeah. At the same time, it's a quite a challenging environment. And you were in the audit, which is not, which is not a strategy consultants, or others. And you were in the risk department. Is that correct?
I was so first I started in the kind of classic entry route to Deloitte. So
why Deloitte in the first place?
That's the right question, because from the outside, the big four firms are very hard to see a difference, right? They have beautiful offices, glossy brochures, they serve the same clients and so on. So in the UK, normally at university, in those days it was still called a milk round. You walk around all the desks and you get to talk to some of the students and some of the managers. And I met 2 or 3 of the hiring managers and I just resonated with them as people. 2 reasons. Firstly, I was like, well, they actually seem pretty fun, definitely hardworking, definitely smart, was super into sport. Ironically, the person I met went on to become the first ever female global chair of a big four firm. She's actually the lady that hired me into the business. So I like to think I was a pretty good judge of character because I resonated with her and thought, hey, she looks like she's having great fun. She's really being successful. The reason I chose Deloitte or chose a big four, one thing that was fantastic with my parents is they were never pushing me towards a career choice or you should do this, you should do that. Super supportive of me being, look, do what you enjoy. Hopefully it's what you're good at. And that led to me doing a geography degree, right? And I just loved the topic. I loved the topics of urbanization. I loved all elements of human geography and physical geography. Just had a real passion and affinity with it. Coming towards the end of my 3rd year degree, you start to realize there's not necessarily too much money to be made from it. Now, if I'd thought a little bit smarter about the future and things like Google Maps, I might have changed my mind, but I missed that one. And so I was like, I've got a degree that I loved, and I don't think I know what to do with it.
Okay.
So the reason I went then to the Big Four was I need another qualification. And what they offered me was a path to chartered accountancy. So you study for 3 years whilst you're working. So you tend to work in one of the large departments. So I worked in the audit department, which is, the financial statement reviews of all the companies. And at the same time you work, you study. So you study every night, you do a ton of exams over the 3 years, and you need to make sure you pass because otherwise you don't have a job because they're pretty rigorous on that. So that was really the entry point. But for me, it was looks like a great place. I resonate with the people, and I'm going to get a qualification that will actually put me into the business world. Which is what I'd said earlier about, okay, I decided I didn't want to be kind of public sector.
Okay. Is it still the same with the Big Four?
I think it is, but I don't know. It's really been a long time since I left. I mean, obviously, as you said, I did 5-6 years there. So, I left around year 2000, I guess 2001. So I think it is. Certainly when I interact now with the partner firms, who obviously now, I'm their client.
Yep.
It seems to be the same, pretty similar model, to be honest.
It's still quite a great social elevator, I would say, huh?
Yeah, it is. It's also competitive. You're conditioned to be ranked, you're rated, which I loved, right? So it resonated again with me. I want to be top in the exams. I want to be top rated student for the year 1, year 2, whatever it is, because partnerships are about getting to the top of the pyramid, right? So it's I'm joining a partnership. Well, there's more students than there are managers. There's more managers than there are senior managers, and there's more senior managers than there are partners. So I also did quite well in that kind of environment.
Okay. So then you're finishing with Deloitte, you're moving to banks, and then there was like a huge career with the banking industry. how it all started.
I think it's a funny one, this, and it's something that I think many organizations struggle with. So Deloitte was fantastic. I mean, some of the things I still practice, I learnt in Deloitte, right? And I was doing well. I was on a good track towards having the potential to become a partner. And part of that, I got to do a secondment to the global head office in New York, which was like a dream, right? I mean,
How old were you?
So it must have been towards the end of the 5 years. So I guess I was 26 years old.
Nice.
I'm sitting in my own office in the global head office on Broadway, middle of Manhattan, right? Just super pumped and the heart of the world, right? And I had a great 3 months. It was a short-term secondment. You get to work on some different projects, and the aim is to bring some of that thought leadership back to your business. The challenge, of course, is when you then come back to sit back at the same desk with the same kind of clients that you were doing 3 months earlier. Yep. You're a bit like, but I feel really different, and I kind of changed my view, and now I've got different aspirations. And so there was a bit of perhaps I want to not go back to doing this.
Yep.
But there was also another moment, and it's an important theme, that whilst I'm competitive and definitely want to do very well at whatever I do, and want to earn a good living, work in the private sector, it was around that time that I also realized that balance was very important to me. And I remember it was Boxing Day. So in the UK, that's the 26th of December, which is a public holiday. And we'd been working on a deal, a corporate finance deal. Deloitte was an advisor to a client. And we'd been working like 18, 20 hours a day for 3 weeks, like you do on those deals. And I'd been reviewing or finishing the report, and I was faxing it. We were using faxes in those days, right? So I was faxing, which dates me. I was faxing the report probably to my manager on the 26th.
It should be quite a...
It was a big report. It was taking me a long time. And the rest of my family were in the other room eating, having festivities.
Oh.
And I was like, I love my job and I'm really enjoying this, and Deloitte's amazing. But you know what? Perhaps I don't want to be doing this. It wasn't quite an epiphany, but it was like I think the track to partnership and what is expected of a partner, and it's fair that it's expected, is I'll have to give my life to the firm. And this is a long time before balance, and I think the firm's introduced much more safeguard and healthy mental wellness and so on. And I was like, you know what, I don't want to do it. And I think those two things combined. So the irony is, after having been sent on this fantastic global secondment, I was like, I don't want to stay. Now, this was in the northwest of England. So I wasn't down in London. I was in like Liverpool, Manchester, great cities. But, the most enjoyable clients I'd worked on and the environments that were most similar to Deloitte in that area were few and far between, because I like academic excellence. I like intellectual rigor. I like to be challenged. I like to work in fast-paced environments. And so financial service kind of fits that bill. It's not the biggest step away from a kind of consulting area. There weren't too many employers, but Bank of America had acquired a large business in that part of the UK, and they were growing very fast. And so the right opportunity came up to move into the internal audit department in Bank of America. And so it was a little bit of a fortuitous, but often, that's the path kind of careers take, right? So that's really why banking, because I felt that it resonated as a high performing, fast paced environment.
Because the projects that you did in Deloitte were not about banking,
Not
right?
really. I mean, I had a couple of large insurance clients.
Okay.
So they were probably the ones that gave me the insight into, okay, this kind of looks like the most enjoyable clients I've worked on, where I felt that I was most challenged and looked like, how to design product, how to, structure financial services products, how to sell them in the right way to customers. It kind of just was more interesting for me than a lot of the other businesses that I was involved with, which were more traditional manufacturing type businesses, which that's typical of that part of the UK. But I didn't get particularly excited about, fast moving consumer goods and stuff like that. It didn't really excite me. If I'd had the opportunity to move to a global multinational sports company, that would have been a different story, but there wasn't one. So although there was an opportunity on that at some point later on, but I didn't take it. But that's a different story. So.
Before we continue to banking, I cannot not mention, it's coming from the early days, you're saying competitive sports, then accidentally you're dropping the Boxing Day, and then that you might have gone to the with a more pleasure, let's say, to the sports company. So sports seems like plays like a big role for you. What would you kind of? Is there any specific learnings from the sport? First of all, would you recommend this as a good well-being? Of course, everybody would recommend, but not in even in a physical way, but more on the characteristics.
Yeah, I'm lucky, incredibly lucky that sport has been
Like
defining in my life. And
what sport you were doing?
So I currently do a lot of triathlon. So triathlon is swimming, cycling, running.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ironmans.
I've done a couple of Ironman. That's hard. That's when you definitely don't have balance in your life when you're training for an Ironman, because 16 to 20 hours of training a week, you do that and your job and you sleep. So for me, those have been do it because I wanted to tick a box. Mm-hmm. I focus on shorter distance ones that I am pretty competitive at still, and can perhaps train 10 to 12 hours a week and still therefore do all the other things that I need and want to do in my life. I was always very naturally talented at sports. In my early youth, I was a good swimmer, a good runner, track runner. As I said, had the real pleasure of training with my dad. I mean, we used to train together because he was a very, very good athlete. Used to win a lot of stuff, which I realized I enjoyed winning. I loved competing. It's given me three things. It's given me the gift of kind of health and the endurance sometimes to get through the tough times that you have in work, in personal life. So being fit and healthy is just, everyone knows it these days, but I don't think everyone used to know it, how important it is. But because I enjoy it and I know how to keep myself fit and healthy, I don't struggle with it. It's naturally part of what I do. So it's not a challenge to go, I've got to go training today, or I've got to go for a walk, I've got to go for a run. I mean, it's the opposite, it's stopping me doing more of that, right? Second is, I didn't realize it until I started work. I guarantee you I have my best thoughts, my unique moments of let's design that for a customer, or let's change that, or how do I deal with this difficult situation, when I am in my flow. And when I'm in my flow is when I'm these days swimming, biking or running, because everything else switches off. The parts of your brain that you need to tap into to get into that kind of thinking, and something suddenly just clicks, right? And so that's been a great learning. But I guess the third is kind of organization and discipline, right? I mean, you realizing nothing comes without making your plans.
Yeah.
Right? So I got to plan my training. How do I fit it in? Right? How am I going to do the most? How am I going to be the best result for the least input? Because that's the reality of something like triathlon or running is I have limited time and I want to get the best result I can. So I think it's made me a very efficient, effective and organized person. Mm-hmm. So that's what's helped me.
But like in your early days, you kind of do it without the guidance from your parents. So kudos to your father.
Yeah, look, that was, as I said, I mean, that's why I'm blessed. I was really, really lucky. It's given us an incredibly strong connection as well. So we still connect through that. I mean, he's in his mid-70s now, and the main thing we'll still chat about is how did his running race last weekend go? He's coming out next week. Me, him, and my son, who's 10, will cycle around Al Qudra. We'll do a 50K, 3 generations bike ride, right?
Wow.
There's not many people who can say that. So I'm proud of him and I'm proud of my son and happy that we get to do stuff like that because that's about as good as it gets.
Wow. 50K, you meaning 50 kilometers?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But how a 10 years old can do that?
He's also a pretty good athlete.
Ah.
I talked about how I bring the kids up, right?
Okay. So I see the best practices are being shared through generations.
Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Bank of America. So how long you stayed there?
6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
Still in the same area in the UK.
In the same area in the UK, although I was lucky enough to get to work quite a lot with both the London offices of Bank of America and also the Charlotte head office, because I got to work on a lot of M&A type projects, always with a risk audit compliance type hat, but often on those complicated, particularly when we were acquiring. And Bank of America in those days was quite an acquisitive business. I got to be part of the due diligence teams and then the sort of team that would merge those organizations in. I also got involved in a lot of projects where we launched either brand new banks, so we launched a bank in Spain, or did large outsourced arrangements, be them in the subcontinent or in Ireland. So I really got to kind of see many different parts of the organization, which was what was great about those 6 years.
Okay. Like how this lens of risk and audit kind of shapes you and maybe helps you and maybe not.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it definitely helps and hinders, right? So look, the what I think I learned, the core skill, the core that has really helped me as a CEO, the ability to understand numbers, financial statements, patterns, complicated reports and analysis very quickly, has served me. I mean, just I could never repay the diligence there. We live and have lived through so many challenging crises, and I'm sure we'll talk about the biggest one that I had to endure with, but a risk mindset, which is, okay, what might happen? What should we try and do about it? And when it does go wrong, how do we deal with it in a calm, methodical, well thought through way is been fantastic for many of the roles I've had to do. The downside to being so embedded in that is sometimes you can become risk averse. You can worry too much or see the downside too much. Now, I'm a pretty optimistic, positive person, so I can normally counter that with my natural, come on guys, let's go for it. But there's been a couple of times when I've thought about, should I step out on my own? Should I look to found a fintech? Should I be a kind of CEO founder? And I self-reflected, and I think that 10 to 15 years of corporate risk probably means that I wouldn't be able to push quite hard enough on some of the really ballsy moves that you'd have to make, because I'd perhaps overanalyze or over whatever. Now, of course, you can have a co-founder or a partner who can push you the other way, but that can sometimes be the challenge of big corporate, and particularly with that sort of risk audit hat.
Okay, thank you. So 6 years in Bank of America in UK. How you ended up in National Bank of Fujairah in Dubai?
Yeah, so I was going to move to Charlotte. So I had been starting to look at career within Bank of America, and had got to know a lot of the team there as some of those M&A deals I was working on, and liked the look of it. I also realized that the clue's in the name. Bank of America is very US centric, and if you really wanted to push your career, it's probably where I needed to be, at least for a period.
Yeah.
And whilst no formal approaches had been made, because corporate takes a while, we'd started to move, and I'd started to prep the family and the wider family that, hey, this is something we were thinking about. And bizarrely, and it definitely is not, it wasn't social media or someone tracking me, because in those days, again, that wasn't really there. I get a phone call completely out of the blue from a headhunter saying exactly what you just said, which is, hey, National Bank of Fujairah, we're looking to modernize, we're looking to get into retail banking, we're looking for a new head of audit. And I wasn't in audit anymore. But obviously that was my background. And they're like, would you be interested? Now, even with my geography degree, I didn't know where Fujairah was, right? I knew where Dubai was. I was like, and they're like, look, the CEO's coming to London. Why don't you just come down and have a meeting? Okay. Hey, look, we're thinking about moving to Charlotte. Why not go and have the meeting? Right? Yeah. Went and had the meeting. Pretty interesting. Did some more research. This is 2006, right?
Yeah.
So there's some information about Dubai. There's not anything like it is now. And then they're like, hey, come out for the weekend to Dubai. I'm happy to come to And I had the privilege of meeting His Excellency Isa Salah Al Ghurg. Now, the Al Ghurg family is one of the, most well-established, respected merchant families. He was the vice chairman of the bank. And I got an hour with him in his offices overlooking the creek where all the big merchant families had their buildings. And I just had this kind of blown away moment when I'm like, I'm not going to get the opportunity in corporate UK or corporate America to work pretty much directly this closely with billionaires who have helped build countries. Because this guy was the go-between between Abu Dhabi and Dubai before the UAE was formed. He was the guy who literally went between the sheikhs. And he did it because at the age of 14, he'd been taught English.
Wow.
And I was just sitting, and of course it was, it was my first introduction to the UAE, which is all about, telling stories and building relationships. And yeah, he'd been the ambassador to his reward, I think, was to become the ambassador to the UK from the UAE, right? So this is a guy who'd knew the Queen. I mean, I was just such a cool guy. I just had this moment. I was like, and we loved Dubai for the weekend. We were like, look, this looks like this place could really be on a path to something fantastic. It's open. It's wanting to push. You just got that real sense of, okay, this could be fantastic. Now, yeah, so I just had a moment when I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to get this chance. This is going to accelerate possibly my career. It's risky, yes, but I think because we'd already told people we were probably thinking about moving to America, I'd done the emotional. People had like, okay, we kind of know you're going. Well, that's a bit closer than America. And the British have a strong relationship in the region, so the Brits. Now, the Americans were pretty surprised because they're like, you want to go to work in the Middle East? Is it safe? I mean, it was literally, and no disrespect to my kind of American colleagues, but they were looking at me like I was out of my mind because for them it's the desert, and all they see, of course, was the bad news, right? And the fairly uneducated view of this part of the world. But yeah, having been out here, we saw opportunity and we took a risk. Now, kids were young. So my eldest daughters, they were 1 and 3. So it was also an opportune time because they weren't in school yet. So they hadn't made connectivity. Mm-hmm. So it was an easy time to move. But we never came with let's try it for 2 years. It was we want to go and see if this becomes a relatively permanent thing. I don't really know why, but that was the view we made. And perhaps it goes back to what I said about whilst we were happy in the UK, I also had not stayed in the same place. So having moved around a lot, I didn't have the same connectivity. And my family was the same family. We were living all over different parts of the country. So we didn't have we're leaving this very tight-knit community. We were all very open to travel and to new experiences.
Was it easy for your wife?
Yeah. I think similar mindset. So it wasn't really a problem. I think her family were a little bit harder to persuade than mine. I think, again, my family had taught me to be very independent, probably kind of expected it at some point. I'm not necessarily the best son in terms of regular phone calls and communication. So I think my family were like, okay, it's probably not that different if you're there or if you're staying in the UK. A little bit different for her, but yeah, no, we were well aligned. It was there was no me dragging or vice versa. That wasn't a problem.
Okay. So, National Bank of Fujairah and the financial crisis, huh? We are getting to this.
Yeah, so obviously when I came to Dubai, it was on fire in a positive way. It was like printing money. I remember a conversation with my CEO, the CEO who'd hired me, great guy, INSEAD Ahmed, who really brought me here. And I was like, it's pretty loose here. I mean, I'd come from a very highly regulated, consumer protectionist, extremely corporate bank, and that was definitely not how things were being run. So a lot of the time, you're, am I right to challenge this, or perhaps this is how it's done here? And so you're adjusting to a lighter emerging market regulator, a very different customer base in terms of financial literacy, consumer protection, just a different market, and and sort of. Yeah, you definitely question yourself a little bit, because I was like, well, some of these things shouldn't we document that a bit more, or shouldn't we kind of take a bit more testing before we implement that thing and some of those stuff. And so quite challenging first 6 months, because definitely the results the bank and all the banks were making were better than what I'd been used to seeing in the UK, but didn't seem as tightly run, right? So you start to question everything that you've been doing. And I remember saying to the CEO, I was like, wow, it's kind of all a bit surprising. And he was like, Chris, the economy here is doing so well that you could literally put a desk outside the branch and put money on it, give it away, and tomorrow they'd give it back to you and you'd make more money. I mean, and that's just I'm just trying to get across how fast the economy was growing.
Yeah.
The government stimulation and their plans, which of course was part of the attraction. The Burj Khalifa was starting to come out of the ground. The real estate market was starting to be built. I mean, it was really booming. And of course, a year later, great financial crisis hits, global markets and hits the local market. And everyone's very aware of how hard hit the real estate sector in particular was here. And the banks were very, very exposed to the real estate sector. So as an expat who's only been here a year or so, your immediate thoughts are obviously concerned for job security.
Of course.
You're seeing many of the people that you've started to get to know leave. And of course you realise that back home the same thing's happening.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh dear, perhaps this wasn't such
a good idea.
And that was compounded by a phone call I got. And the phone call I got was... and I'll do an abridged version because it's a long story, but effectively the board of the bank, like probably many, had lost some faith in the CEO's kind of performance, and wanted to appoint a new CEO, but that new CEO couldn't yet join, and so they needed interim because they wanted the current CEO to leave immediately. And they suggested that I and one other member of the executive should become the sort of interim co-CEO. And I didn't really think that was necessarily a very good idea, because I was not ready to do it. I was 34.
34.
Right? Yeah, I think 34. I had never run a bank. I had definitely never run a bank in a global financial crisis. And I'd only been in the country for a year and a bit. So I didn't understand half of what was going on. I mean, it's a complicated culture.
It is.
Right? And 20 years later, I realized I understood even less than I thought I did, right? But I also realized that this was a great honor, that they had grown to trust me, and it re-emphasized the importance of that trust. And it was interim, right? It's babysitting is a ridiculous word to use because you can't babysit a bank, but it was, look, hold the fort, we trust you, you're rigorous, you're solid, people get on with you well. And but it was a 3-month period. It was supposed to be, because that was probably, I think, the notice that I guess the other guy was supposed to be serving. But as often in the Middle East, things don't pan out that way. He never arrived. And I think it was 9 months I had to do the role for. And about halfway through that, the co-CEO decided he would go and seek a better opportunity. So I was doing it on my own. And that was 10 years of learning, because I was sitting with seasoned global CEOs in front of the governor of the central bank, talking about, how the business is doing, how is what relief measures do we need, do we suggest? And I mean, the learning from some of those guys for me was just like, this is hard, very challenging, but wow. So in my good moments, I was like, wow, I made a great decision to come here. I would never have got this opportunity. Obviously, in the down moments, you're like, I am so out of my depth. When I'm so out of my depth. Luckily, the board, the management team was super engaged, super close to the business. And the bank came through it all really well. Of course, with some challenges, but came through it really well. And probably time and distance dims the memory a little bit, because it was an absolute baptism of fire. But it changed my career path, because it meant I stepped out of the risk world into the running a business world. And even though it was tough and challenging, I was like, some of that was pretty good. Pushing some of those board meetings, re-looking at the strategy, engaging with all of the organization. I quite enjoyed that. And some of it seemed to go okay, right? I mean, not all of it, but some of it went okay. Perhaps I don't want to go back to risk and audit, which was obviously a bit of a challenge, because obviously that was kind of the plan was, well, you'll go back to doing what you were doing before. Mm-hmm. And a little bit like the Deloitte New York experience, I'm like, I don't think I want to go back to what I was doing before. Oh, well, that's a problem, because you're not ready to run the business. And I wasn't ready to run a national bank, for sure. But my appetite had been kind of set, right? So the experience, I suppose it opens your eyes, perhaps to what you're capable of, perhaps where some of your natural skill sets are that you'd never had a chance to kind of go with before. So that, probably set me on the path that I've been on ever since.
What were the good and bad decisions in that period?
Well, there were lots of both. I think that the overriding bad decision was I wasn't tough enough. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is, whenever you get a period of crisis and challenge, people start playing politics, they start jockeying for position, they start, there's disgruntled people who are like, oh, why was it you? Why wasn't it me? Mm-hmm. Right? Whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter, because the board has made its decision, and the board has said, look, Chris, you're the person that we want you to do this. I'm competitive, but I don't seek out conflict. I don't enjoy fighting with someone. I try to work together. Let's find a solution. And there were probably more than a couple, when that should not have been my approach on that. It was like, guys, we're in a crisis. I'm in charge, and this is the way it needs to be. But I was 34. And these guys were a lot older and a lot more experienced than me. And I was like, okay, let's find a way. And so I think sometimes in those crisis moments, you need to be a little bit more decisive. And I think these days I would be. But back then I was probably not decisive enough and just tough enough on holding a line on certain decisions. I think, so that was really, the second was I probably just tried to do too much. I mean, you're just, okay, right, it's a few months, but I want to relook at the strategy, and that wasn't really the remit. The remit was just make sure it all stays steady. But I'm like, no, we're going into the year end, and I want to do this, and we've got to do the next year. And so I think I probably tried to do too much. You try to engage. I mean, I remember I think in 2 days, I was like, I'm going to visit every branch. Now, we weren't one of the largest banks, but we definitely weren't one of the smallest banks. And we had branches in Al Ain, in obviously Fujairah, down in Abu Dhabi, and I'm going to visit all of them and speak to the staff and say, everything's going to be okay, guys. Because everyone was worried, right? And again, no Zoom, no Teams, nothing like that in those days, right? So, I remember like doing a few days like that, which, you set yourself the target to push, but perhaps I wasn't balancing my energy well enough to then, be able to deliver. So I think that those were the challenging. I think the good decisions were making sure that we worked well together as a top team, so kept everyone very in the loop, so over communication, much more frequent interactions with the board and the non-exec directors. MBF was quite well advanced in terms of having non-exec directors already, certainly in their board subcommittees, if not. So bringing the very experienced people in to help, so being open to their advice, to their guidance, not trying to solve it all myself. That was definitely a good thing to do. Keeping up with my sport, so I still managed to keep on doing physical activity, because I think if I hadn't done, it was less than I would have liked, but something. So that keeping some balance was definitely a good decision, because there were many days when obviously I was feeling quite overwhelmed. And I think the other thing I remember doing was kind of mapping out my key stakeholders. This was a time when obviously big customers were worried about what was going on with their own business with banks. So did a lot of customer engagement, a lot of customer visits. Spent a lot of time with the regulator, because obviously they were pretty focused on how the banks were doing. I also stuck to my values. I mean, there was many things that you didn't want to have to say were going on, because there was obviously a crisis like that exposes some weaknesses in your business. But I was probably to my own detriment. I was pretty truthful and pretty direct with how things were going with the board and what was going well and where we were going to probably need to make a difficult decision about closing this service line and stuff like that. So, I was pretty happy that I kind of stuck to my values about how I saw things, which I think is why they put me in charge.
Exactly. That's the idea that was keeping in my head. Okay, so you're passed through financial crisis. Are you still staying in the NBF, or you're already moving to?
No, the crisis was pretty much certainly most of it was over. Certainly, everyone was out of crisis mode. It was then in terms of, okay, what are the solutions? What are the long-term rebuild modes? And the new CEO was set up to come in, and I was extremely fortunate. Again, I think I wasn't at that stage going to look for a role, because I was a bit like, okay, well, let's see what happened. I didn't plan to only join for this short period, but with the eyes being open, I got a phone call from a recruiter hiring for Mubadala. Now, this was the time that Abu Dhabi was in its big phase of diversifying the economy. Right? We need to diversify away from oil, energy reliance. And so Mubadala was setting up a ton of new businesses. And one of the big businesses they were setting up was real estate finance, which kind of was, I think, and they launched a company called Abu Dhabi Finance. I'm pretty sure it made front page Financial Times. And it mainly made that because it was like, wait a minute, we've just kind of had the massive mortgage-led banking crisis. You guys are setting up? And they're like, well, yeah, because the banks all stopped lending, and we're building cities here, and we're building countries here, and we can't have no supply of real estate finance. So you can understand the concept, but obviously to the rest of the world that's suffering like crazy, they didn't understand it from the outside, right? So when these guys rang, it resonated at two levels. Firstly, it's like, well, it's new, so get the chance to be part of something that's being built. And remember, this is no one was saying the word fintech, no one was saying the word startup. None of that was. So this was, but like, when did people form new banks? This doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, sovereign wealth, pretty safe.
Yep.
Just felt a bit uncomfortable with this whole financial crisis thing. You know what? And I guess the deep inside, perhaps this is a chance to also reinvent and get on that path to CEO, because I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
Right. I actually went into initially though, back into an audit risk role. To move, you often have to do what people see you as being done. But yeah, that's kind of how it happened, and those were the reasons for taking the role.
So you're spending there 12 years.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a tenure.
Yeah.
And during those years, you also did the IDP.
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
So tell me briefly, like why you did INSEAD, why in that point of time, and what happened with the bank?
So look, I went in and fairly quickly after joining, I think that the founding CEO had probably delivered what they'd want him to deliver, which is get the business off the ground and get it going in the right direction. And then they kind of wanted to take it on from there. And so I was, I guess, lucky enough to be offered that CEO role. That was my first full-time formal CEO role. And yeah, we were on a great trajectory, kind of hitting all the targets, growing the business very nicely. Partly, I think, because what we focused on was customer.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it all sounds silly when you say it now because you're like, of course. But that's not really what banks here were doing in those days. They were still product push, making a lot of money out of it. And we were like, no, we're going to reinvent the mortgage product because there is so much pain in the mortgage product for customers. And there was in those days. It was months of pain with no communication and no just it was pretty poor. So we basically disrupted. We didn't really disrupt through technology, to be honest with you, because that was still... It was happening elsewhere, but still wasn't really happening here. We just disrupted by good old-fashioned, let's relook at the customer experience end-to-end.
Mm-hmm.
Let's reinvent the communication, how everything looks, how everything feels, and put some playful things around the product, which is a pretty boring product, a mortgage, but put some nice things around it. You know, we created a mortgage companion who takes you through the journey, built some great relationships with the developers, with the agents, with the brokers. And, you know, at our I think our best year, we were doing 1 in every 3 mortgages in Abu Dhabi. You know, this is only a few years after starting up against some big established players, right? So it was all going very, very well. But the reality is fairly limited market. Even with Abu Dhabi growing at speed, there's a certain amount of business you can do. And you are competing, of course, against banks who have share of wallet.
Yep.
So there's also a reality. So it was very clear to the board and to the management team that we needed to grow our markets, so move into other markets, and probably needed to look to diversify.
Mm-hmm.
We also needed to become more sophisticated in terms of our balance sheet structure. So we were considering some what would have been very new in the market securitization type transactions. Some would argue the very transactions that had caused the financial crisis to get into difficulty. So when I first sort of presented to the board that we should be looking at Saudi, looking at outside of Abu Dhabi, we should be looking at SME lending, and we should be securitizing, I think they thought that I'd gone a little bit crazy, right? But as you're looking at all that, you realize the business is growing really, really fast. And what Mubadala was fantastic at was developing its high potential people. And so that was when the conversation started about executive education, and not just for me, but also for the chairman of our board. And so one of the things they were looking at that time was really trying to develop the capability of their people who were either sitting on boards or the CEOs that were effectively interacting with those boards. I'd been lucky enough to also be involved with Mubadala on a couple of advisory type projects in other areas of financial services. So that all came together. And I started looking, going, okay, wait a minute, my world's about to get a lot more complicated. I'm talking about geographical expansion, complicated roads. I need some, and really trying to therefore help our board make sure they're also equipped to do the job, you know, that they need to be able to do. And so I looked around, and that was when I identified the IDP program as being something that would help me understand from a board's perspective, you know, how to be a good board and therefore how to run a good board. I thought it would make me a better CEO in this much more complicated organization that I was trying to kind of build. And I think that resonated with Mubadala. They had been probably put a few other people already through the program. And as I said, were very smart to then even put my chair through it. I think he went a couple of years later than me, but that was a really good insight from them as an organization to not put just your CEOs, but also your board members through the same kind of programs, because then you can really create some bonds, some alignments and some, okay, yeah, let's do this together, right? So, which of course is, you know, the role of the board is to challenge and support. And so that was very, very cool. I remember some good conversations with him about what he was learning, what I was seeing. I used Abu Dhabi Finance as my case study as part of my program. So yeah, I think it all just came together at the right time, which was an organization that wanted to invest in its people and a real need that we were trying to enhance governance, and the organization was about to become much more complicated.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Chris, one thing that I mentioned when I'm looking at your CV and on your LinkedIn profile, let's be clear here, a lot of volunteering. And even after getting from IDP in 2021, you're becoming a vice president of the local alumni association.
Sure. Yeah.
Why? What
I
does
ask myself that many, believe me, a lot of times. Look, I remember even as a teenager, spending some time with my athletics qualifications, doing coaching of younger kids when there was an opportunity. I remember prior to INSEAD, running some fitness and running classes for the employees in the building we were in, right? I haven't spent too much time to analyze why. I just know that I enjoy it. As you get older, you kind of reflect, okay, in your life, what are the different things you're getting? I think I've been super lucky. I mean, honestly, I had a great upbringing. I've managed to make relatively good career choices that have put me in a position where I've built a skill set, a network that I can bring a lot of value to sort of organizations. The INSEAD experience for me was very powerful. And I felt immediate value in my role from it. And so I was like, well, this was great. When it ended, I didn't want it to end. But I wasn't obviously going to go IDP was, for me, as I look at it, was the pinnacle of, I was late, right? There was many other programs earlier in my career that I would have loved to have done, but they weren't. Having done the chartered accountancy with Deloitte, which is 3 years of study and work, I was pretty burnt out in terms of trying to do more education, right? So I didn't want to lose the connection. I didn't want to lose some of the different thinking, the stimulus. And yes, you can do that, of course, just through continuing to attend education. But it basically came about because I remember fairly soon after I had graduated, the new president at the time, a guy called Elias, was forming his new team. And I picked up the email saying, hey, just come for a lunch. We're just getting together. Anyone who might be interested. I was like, well, I might be interested. Let's go and have a pizza. An hour later, I walk out in my first volunteer role with the association as the treasurer. So I was like, back to my finance. And obviously, well, you're the banker. You do treasury. And I'm like, I don't really know how it happened. He's a very persuasive guy. But it looked just a way to be kind of connected. I wasn't really thinking about it as a big way to give back at that stage. It was, look, it'll make me part of it. I love being around, and probably still comes from my Deloitte experience of high energy, academic, smart people. And this was a great way of doing that as I first saw it. Now, as I probably became, again, a more experienced CEO, a wider network, when the next association president was sort of formed and asked me to be the vice president, that's when I probably started seeing it more as volunteer, giving a lot more time and giving back, right? And even though it takes time, honestly, the thing that I love just being able to help someone easily. I'm been here so long, I'm well connected, and there's so many people now who want to, who've committed their time to INSEAD, and then they just want to help in the market, help with the role, help with a job, help with some advice. It's literally normally 30 seconds for me to email someone else to help them, right? And that, honestly, the feeling from doing that is like, it's just a massive buzz and it costs nothing. I mean, it's literally that.
And you were one of the first people who replied on my emails when I was moving in. So.
Yeah, so I don't think you really, you don't necessarily realize until you've been doing it a bit that you you get a buzz out of it, right? Then it makes you feel very fulfilled. So so it makes me feel good, right? When I can help people, because I got a lot of help. Like, I mean, I got plenty of help all my way through. I've been super lucky. So the more you can do that is, it's a good feeling. And honestly, the school, I mean, would I do it in a country where the school didn't have a campus? I don't know. I mean, it makes it easier having the campus here, feeling quite close to, therefore, still the energy. Obviously, I've been back for other, sort of smaller, shorter programs. But yeah, it's a great community. I think I can add value to it, but I get a lot from it as well.
Chris, it's been 1 hour. It flew like this. Unfortunately, we need to wrap it up.
Okay.
But as a final question, I want to ask you, like, look, what would be your 3 things you would advise? Because you had a great career overall. You grew through ranks. Now you're the CEO of the team, fintech company here. So you got it. You have a great family. You changed the geographies. You changed multiple companies. I always also keep hearing the word lucky. But look, there are a lot of things that you can control. So what would be your, again, 3 things you would advise to the people who are there, who are throughout their career, how to get successful, how to get there?
Cliche word, and I'm not going to say how to do it, because I think there's many different ways, but you have to build network. Now, you can build network through so many different... I mean, I build my network through my sports. I mean, the amount of business opportunity I've had through sports, as in just be a connected person. Yes, you might be a bit tired, but there's an event. Go to the event, right? Give something back to it, invest into it, show interest in what other people are doing. Just all those things. That just don't be narrow that I'm working so hard I don't have time. Okay, well then you won't be lucky in 2 years' time because someone won't call you, or you won't be able to connect. So, and this part of the world, probably more than anywhere, it is so important that people get to know you, get to trust you, and you add value through that connection, right? So I don't think I was doing it consciously in my younger career, and I think I perhaps could have done even better, right, if I'd even done it more. So it's something I learned a bit later, but that power of connection and network, because now people talk to me about wow, how did you build such a network? And I'm like, I don't really know. I did, but I think a lot of it is, I mean, I still respond to everyone who comes to me on LinkedIn, right? So number 1 is that. Number 2, balance. I talked about it a lot. So most nights I do a pretty good job of leaving the office at a reasonable hour. I may work a little bit later sometimes. There's some weekend, of course, you have different times when you have to do whatever, but I have 4 things that are important in my life. They ebb and flow depending on what the priorities are at the time, but it's work, family, me, as in looking after me, and for me that's my sport. And the 4th, as I've got older, is this kind of, okay, giving back or doing something that is not for you, right? And work is kind of for you, right? So I plan it. I mean, I plan that. So I have my plan for the week, for the month, for the quarter, for the year as to how I'm going to achieve that balance. And there'll be times I do more of this and times I do less of this. To achieve that, the 3rd thing that I think is most important, and my natural style has served me well in the current, particularly the zeitgeist of empowerment and helping other people to do the best they can do. So whatever role you've got, I think if you talk to people about what they would think I do best as a CEO, is to trust and empower them to do the best job they can do. So don't over-control, don't micromanage, don't whatever. Now, sometimes people make a lot of mistakes and things go wrong because of that, but I think that would be the one thing that perhaps sets me apart from some other CEOs, is I trust you, going to help you to do the best you can do. I think that's what my job is to get everyone in the company to do the best job they can do. And creating that space and support to do that, I've seen some people do some stuff that they definitely didn't think they could do that then help the organization. So being very focused on other people's growth is something I would encourage everyone to be. As you become more and more senior, just focus on that, because that's how you get your organization doing the best it can do.
Chris, thank you so much for your time and
welcome.
for the inspiration. It's we definitely need 1 more hour.
We'll do a part 2, season 2, if people like it.
It's a deal. It's a deal, man. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.